Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jerusalem Connection Red Alert Report. I am your host, Amy Zewe. Today, we have a special guest for you, Doron Sapir. He is an Israeli historian, educator, and academic lecturer with more than 35 years of experience in teaching, research, and public education. He specializes in the history of Eastern European Jewry, the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, the history of the State of Israel, the Israeli-Arab conflict, genocide studies, and the Israeli political system, which can be quite complex. Doron has lectured at the Open University of Israel and has taught generations of high school and university students. His work is dedicated to making complex historical and political issues accessible to diverse audiences while encouraging critical thinking, historical perspective, and an understanding of how different narratives shape the interpretation of history. Throughout his career, Doron has collaborated with leading Polish cultural and historic institutions, including the Polish Institute in Israel and the Pilecki Institute. Doron is a Polish citizen currently living in Washington, D.C. He welcomes the opportunities to collaborate with universities, museums, educational institutions, media organizations, and public forums to promote informed dialogue on history, memory, democracy, and the contemporary relevance of the past. Doron, welcome to this program. It is such a treat to have you with us today.
Hi, Amy, and hi, all the audience. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we are so curious about your career as an intellectual, an educator, a historian. You have a wide range of specialization and expertise. We would love to learn what has led you down these paths. Tell us a little bit about your history and evolution as an intellectual, a researcher, and what brought you to your different areas of expertise.
So, I did not begin my life planning to become a historian or political science. I studied at a vocational high school in Israel. My parents believed it was important for me to learn a particular profession, so I studied electronics and electricity. Looking back, these were not the right subjects for me. So my escape was history and civics. I had a wonderful teacher named Yuda Milo. He made history feel alive. He did not only teach dates or events, he helped us understand people, ideas, political issues and choices, and even the connection between the past and the present. My teacher, Yuda Milo, did not only teach me the history, he changed the direction of my life. Because of him, I later studied political science, education, and civics at the University of Haifa in Israel. I became a history and a civic teacher, and later lecturer at the Open University in Israel. For more, as you introduced me, 35 years, I taught Israeli politics, Zionism, Jewish history, genocide, democracy, and so on. But over the time, I became interested not only in the question, what happened? I became very interested in other questions. How do different societies remember, interact, and teach what happened? I learned that history and political science are deeply connected. The way we tell the story of the past can influence on our national identity, our political relationship, and the way different people see even one another today.
As that discovery unfolded in your path of both learning and then, of course, teaching, and you started to see that perspectives were part of how people then interpret what they learn, or perspectives also influence how something's taught. You also got involved in the Eastern European Jewry, and you got involved with Poland. You hold a Polish citizenship. Tell us a little bit about that particular path and niche, because that eventually led for you to work with the Polish government and various ministries and agencies. We'd love to learn about how that idea of perspective influenced, in particular, things like, for example, Holocaust studies and education.
For first, the connection to Poland is not only academic. It's deeply personal. All four of my grandparents were born in Poland, At the beginning of the 20th century, they all came from Orthodox Jewish families, and that is a remarkable story in my family. My two grandmothers went to the same Jewish school in Praga, that is a neighborhood of Warsaw, and they even shared the same school desk. At the beginning of the Second World War, their lives went in different direction. Both of them escaped from Poland to the Soviet Union, but each one escaped separately with her own family. Eventually, both family reached to Uzbekistan, where my mother and my father was born there. After the war, the family came to Israel, and in 1966, it was a reunion of that Jewish school from Warsaw. It was held in Tel Aviv, and my two grandmothers met again after more than 20 years. Because of that reunion, my mother and father met. So, in a way, the story of Poland, the war, the escape, and the school reunion are all part of the story who I came into the world. This is why Poland was never only another country for me. Poland was connected to my family, connected to survival, pain, memory, and identity. But for many years, Poland was also seen in my family as a place of death and loss.
So that is truly remarkable, the harrowing nature of your heritage and the fact that your grandmothers were able to escape and reconnect in Israel. So, and I'm glad they did. And I'm sure that's a whole epic that's worthy of a novel or an amazing film, I'm sure. So, as you were being raised and you were learning from your grandparents or your parents, that history of the Holocaust, the early and mid 20th century, what was going on with you as you started to study history formally and look at those perspectives, and tell us how what perspectives you were learning or teaching from, and then how you got connected as an adult, as a researcher and historian, to then work with the organizations in Poland to help take what you've learned and mastered and help deliver that to a new audience now outside of the Israeli system, but maybe to the Polish participants.
I must tell you the story how I connected to Poland. So, for many years, my father refused to travel to Poland. He promised to his mother that he would never return to what she called the land of blood. So after she passed away, I finally convinced him to go. Because he's made a promise, I even took him to a rabbi to release him from that promise. Finally, 1998, we traveled together to Poland for a family road journey. Also, my wife was joining us. And at that time, it was difficult to find a Hebrew speaking guide, so we traveled with a Polish guide who spoke English. This journey changed my professional life. I was a graduate in Israel in a published school system, and I studied and taught the Israeli narrative of the Holocaust. At that time, I did not think of it as a narrative. For me, it was simply a complete truth. Of course, it was based on true history, on a real detraction of the Jewish people, but not yet understood how national memory select some part of history and give less attention to other parts. When we visited Auschwitz, the Polish guide spoke about Polish political prisoners, members of the Polish leadership, academics, anti-Nazi regime, and other groups who were in prison there. And I became angry. For me, Auschwitz was first of all the symbol of a murder of the Jewish people. I told her that most of the victims of Auschwitz-Birkenau were Jews. I also spoke about Polish anti-Semitism, collaboration, and the suffering of the Jewish at the hands of some of the Polish neighbors. For my surprise, she answered politely. She said that Poland had also been occupied and destroyed by the Nazi regime. The Polish society suffered, and many Polish leaders and intellectuals had been murdered. She also said that many of the Jewish victims had been Polish citizens. She saw them as Polish victims as well as Jewish victims. At that time, I thought she was giving us the wrong story. Years later, I understand that was presenting the part of the Auschwitz, uh, she present the Polish national memory, while I was presenting the part that was central to the Jewish and the Israeli memory. This does not mean that all suffering was the same. It does not mean that every interpretation is equally correct. But both of us came to Auschwitz carrying a national story. That was the first time I truly understand that two people can look at the same historical place, know many of the same facts, and still see a different story.
That's amazing. That's an amazing discovery. And I'm certain that as you dug into that, it might have had something to do with the communist occupation of Poland as well up until 1989 from after the war. But you saw this gap, you saw this two different approaches to the, like you said, the same space and event in history. And you looked at this gap, and what did you do with that gap at first? Did you try to bridge it? Did you try to analyze it? How did that affect then your approach or your journey to that idea of looking at history from those different perspectives, national memories and such? How did, like, just tell us how you worked that out. Like, once you had this realization that, wait a minute, the Poles are looking at it this way, the Israelis are looking at it this way, and there's a deficit. What was your initial reaction to that?
So, in the first, I want to tell to myself what is the Israeli perspective and what is the Polish perspective and what is the difference between them. So, the Israeli perspective is strong shaped by the Holocaust. For many Israelis, Poland is connected, first of all, to ghettos, to camps, to anti-Semitism, to collaboration, and the destruction of the Jewish communities. These perspectives come from real Jewish suffering and from experience of survival and their families, including my family. The Polish perspective often begins somewhere else. Poles remember the invasion of the country, the destruction of the Polish state, the murder of the Polish leaders and intellectuals, the resistance. 2 days ago, according it now on the 3rd of August, but in the 1st of August, Polish made a large remember day of the resistance to the Nazis. They are talking about how Polish civilians suffered under German occupation. They are not. They also remember that Poland did not have any collaboration national government like some other occupied countries. Within Polish society, there were different kinds of behavior. Some of the people collaborate with the German regime. Some acts because of anti-Semitism, fear, or personal desire to survive. Other Poles risked their life to rescue Jews. Poland has a very large number of people recognized as a right cause among the nation. Many other were mainly trying to survive and remain silent to still live. The difficulty begins between these two perspectives that one side present only its own pain and cannot hear the pain of the other side. For many Israelis, hearing about Polish suffering can sound like an attempt to reduce the Polish responsibility. For many Poles, hearing only the collaboration can sound like a denial the Polish suffering under the Nazi occupation. So my position today is that we must be honest about all parts of the story. We must speak clearly about anti-Semitism, collaboration, and violence against the Jews, but we should also speak about rescue, resistance, Polish victim, and effort made by the Polish institution and individual to save Jewish life. Understanding the Polish perspective does not mean accepting every Polish claim. And in the other hand, understanding the Israeli perspective or Jewish perspective does not mean that it is the only possible perspective. You asked me how I try to deal with it. So I did not try to replace the Israeli story with the Polish story. I tried to add missing parts. Later, I began working with the Polish Institute in Israel and with the Polish Embassy. In the Polish Embassy, there was ambassador to Israel at that time called Mr. Marek Magarowski. He later became a Poland ambassador to the US too, and he made serious effort to speak directly to the Israeli society. He even studied Hebrew so that he could communicate with Israeli in their own language. For
Amazing.
the Polish Constitution Day, which is a very important Polish national holiday, he held a reception at his residence, and I was asked to prepare and record a lecture in Hebrew that explains the meaning of that holiday to Israeli audience. I also prepared educational program connected to 100th anniversary of the restoration of Polish independence in 1918. We created lectures, public events, and short videos for social media. One important story I helped introduce to Israeli audience was the story of a Polish diplomat in Switzerland during the Second World War. These diplomats were working together with Jewish activists, and they helped obtain Latin America passport and documents for thousands of Jews in occupied Europe. Many Israelis had never heard this story. This story does not erase Polish anti-Semitism or collaboration. It does not change the fact that many Jews suffered because of the action of some Polish citizens, but it adds an important part that's missing from the picture. Unfortunately, some Israeli react with suspicious. They believe that Poland was only trying to improve its public image. The story received much less attention in Israel than I was expected. That taught me that facts alone are not always enough. People also need trust. They need to believe that you are not using one true story to hide another true story. My goal was never to make the Polish part look innocent. My goal was to show that history is usually more complex than the national stories we first learn. I can tell you also that I work with with one of the museum in Poland. And
Yeah,
it's your,
tell us
okay.
about that. We would love to learn that. I know that so the ambassador that you worked with in Israel, I had the honor of meeting both him and his wife during their station here in Washington D.C. And it was under his leadership that I attended in June of 2023, a tour of a study tour of Poland where I was with a variety of Jewish Americans, of just highly educated and of various backgrounds, and I was really blessed to be able to watch their own discovery of this, just as you're saying, this complex history that they didn't know about or mistrusted the delivery of. And so what you're saying echoes what I was able to witness, and it's just amazing for me to hear it from your point of view. And I did visit the Warsaw Ghetto Museum and the Politsky Institute. So I would really love to hear your experience on how you began to work with them, what the objective was, what you discovered and accomplished. This is very important for our audience, as Holocaust education is part of our project base here at the Jerusalem Connection, and we are always looking for more information and more insight so that we have a broader view, a nuanced view, but at the same time preserving the truth and the reality of what actually happened.
So I will start the story about the Polish Museum. The Polish Museum is very important to this story. You have been in the Polish Museum. So the Polish Museum, for our audience in Warsaw, present the long history of the Jewish life in Poland. It does not begin with the Holocaust. It presents centuries of Jewish religious, culture, economic life, political activity, and the relation between the Jews and their Polish neighbors. But many Israeli educational delegation traditionally focused almost on the Holocaust sites. So some Israeli groups did not include that museum and that program. There was a concern that presenting many centuries of Jewish life in Poland could reduce the importance of the Holocaust. So I will take some water. Well, I see it differently. Showing the long history of the Jewish life does not minimize the Holocaust. It helps us understand what was destroyed. Later, the Polish opened the new Warsaw Ghetto Museum, and the Polish institution understood that Israeli visitors may be suspicious if the story was written only by Polish point of view. So through the Pilecki Institute in Warsaw, I was asked to prepare Hebrew educational materials for the museum. I was asked to present the history from an Israeli and Jewish perspective, so Israeli students, educators, and visitors would feel that the historical experience was respected. I agree to participate on that one, I agree to participate in that work, but in one condition: the narrative could not be changed for political reasons. Of course, historical correction were welcome, but the Israeli perspective had to remain as it. But the Polish were carefully reviewed my materials. They took a Polish professor who spoke Hebrew and was working at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem at that time. He made some historical correction, but the Israeli Jewish narrative was preserved. So again, adapting history for a particular audience does not have to mean to changing the truth. I can mean respecting the background, language, knowledge, and emotional experience of that audience. It's make everybody comfortable. So this is what I can work in the Polish museum.
So how were your contributions then received by the Hebrew speaking community members that or travelers that visited, and do you think that any of that perspective was also added to, for example, the English speaking tours and narratives, because a lot of Jews from America, North America, for example, may also visit, and they may share, of course, the Israeli perspective as well? Are you aware of how the English speaking narrative may have been influenced by your, I don't want to use the word revision because that sounds like it's changing things, but your a broadening of the story, that it's more complete?
I must tell that this museum hold an American history historian that wrote the materials from the American point of view. So everyone can reach to the museum to take, the headphones and hear that perspective, and it doesn't make any antagonism to what he see. I must tell you a very funny story about how different point of view are connecting together. It's a personal story. So I'm teaching in the university as a historian that a lot of Jews was running away from Poland to Soviet Union because they were running away from the Nazis. But every time I'm telling this story, I'm laughing inside of me because in 1939, my grandmother was 19 years old, and her family wanted to her to accept arranged marriage. It's very common that day. But unfortunately, she was in love with another man who later became my grandfather. And he was 17 years older than her, and he worked as a plumber in Warsaw. Her family reject the relationship. So they married secretly at the City Hall of Warsaw in August 1930. It was 1 week before the war.
Wow.
And because of the family conflicts and the community's reactions, they decided to escape from Poland to Soviet Union. So historically, my grandmother escaped from the Nazi regime. But in our family, we sometimes say that she was also escaping from her family and from the arranged marriage. Now, stories are true,
Yeah.
but it's the large historical story explain what happened to a group. The personal story remains as that people experience history as individuals with love, fear, family conflict, dreams, and personal decision. Well, I'm telling this story also to my students, and they are laughing, but it's made them trying to understand that we have to hear the story and the all parts of the story. I teach in the university, so I saw many times that the reaction to the story is very emotional and different. I thought occurs in Holocaust with academic and with criticals. We present in this story different historical interpretation of the same event. For example, we are talking about an historian, American historian, Kershaw, his explanation of how the Nazi system operated. Kershaw explains that many officials did not always wait for a direct order from Hitler. They tried to understand what Hitler wanted, and they competed with one another to carry out some radical policies. After I'm showing a young Kershaw point of view, some students became very angry. They thought I was reducing Hitler's responsibility for the Holocaust. They accused me of making him less guilty. Well, Hitler I am explaining that Hitler remains responsible for the leadership and for the direction of the Nazi regime. But other historian must other student must be and must know that a historian explaining how thousands of officials, soldiers, and ordinary people turn this regime to mass murder. Sometimes the students accept my explanation, sometimes they did not.
Wow.
And a bridge does not always mean that we have to agree. Sometimes the best result is that both sides understand exactly where they disagree. We must understand when people are emotionally connected to historical explanation and your interpretation can feel like a personal treat. In that situation, I do not try to force agreements. I present the evidence, I explain the history questions, I listen to their reactions, and I allow people time to think. So this is a part of education. Sometimes education questions give a person a time to think, maybe later. It doesn't have, immediate change or effect.
Well, that's how you foster critical thinking. Even if what you present conjures up the ire of the student, where it does feel like a threat to what they thought or know, if you can encourage them to become curious perhaps and maybe research more, or like you said, just think about it more. And in your example that you gave, to me, it seems like assigning more responsibility to the underlings of history doesn't alleviate Hitler's guilt. It just proves the poison that Hitler was able to distribute in Europe amongst the Germans, amongst the generals and the soldiers, like you say. It almost broadens the responsibility and still puts it on Hitler. But you're right. It does. If you present a fact or a story that butts the idea that somebody already has learned, it does take time to digest, and someone might not fully agree. That's for certain. So from these years of doing what you do, what have you Yes, has your presentation evolved, or have you learned anything about how to present varying perspectives and how to share them to generate more growth or to alleviate sort of that negative initial reaction? Or do you just let that negative initial reaction take place and hopefully the seeds of curiosity and even the seeds, sometimes when you're angry about something, you do want to go research it more to prove somebody wrong.
So when I'm teaching in the university, I share my student with some principle in the beginning of the lectures. So I have approach today has a four simple principle. First, facts matter. No, not everything is only narrative. Historical evidence is important, and some claims are simply false. The second, every society selects certain facts and gives them special meanings. What society chooses to remember is often connected to its national identity, pain, feel, and you mentioned communist political needs. Third, understanding another perspective does not mean agreeing with every part of it. I can understand why a Polish person sees the war in a certain way without accepting every Polish interpretation, and a Polish historian can understand the Israeli memory of the Holocaust without accepting every Israeli generalization about Poland. And the fourth principle, I try to add missing parts instead of replacing one story with another. There is also difference between large historical explanation of personal stories. Okay, so these four principles, trying to, to release the anger and trying to see a, a big story, a big event for a lot of point of view. When you have this point of view, you can choose the point of view that you are emotionally connected, and it's all right. No one said that is the really true and the other perspective is not the true. We have to hear it not only in historical issues and also in political arguments, for example. We must hear the other side, and then after we hearing the other side, we can choose in which side we will stay or change our mind. This is very important for people to understand the whole story and the full story, and I think I trying to do it the best for my students and my colleagues.
Well, that's wonderful. I think you're doing a great job, and I would be
Thank
curious.
you.
I think we could have you on another episode and maybe talk about how your approach to studying history might also need to be applied to the current situation in Israel, dealing with other narratives that are floating around currently. For example, the issue with Gaza post October 7th, the war. But we'll save that for another time because that's probably a whole separate episode we could do a series on. So Doron, what can our audience take away from what your body of work over the course of your life? How can we access or learn more about your studies or the museums and the institutes in Poland? Where can we learn more about these perspectives? How can we contact you if somebody wanted to engage and have you maybe talk to a high school class or a university class? Do you have resources that you can recommend or share with us?
Well, I'm now in the US in the DC area, and I'm ready to make lectures and show my educational and my professional to other audience, academics audience, and also people around that want to see and to hear from me. I would like to share my phone number and also maybe the email address with your helps, and I will be very glad to come and to add some stories and to tell all the kind of perspective. Its history is group stories and individual stories, and making it together make it very very fun. So I invite everyone who want to hear from me just to connect me, and I would delight to come and to make some lectures and teach if you want some courses and so on.
Well, that's just wonderful. To me, what it seems to me, as you explain what you do, it's almost like a mosaic, right? So, in order to get the whole picture and stand back and see the whole thing, it's all these individual pieces. There's the actual historical facts, there's personal experiences, and then there's community experiences. And so it's a beautiful thing to try to put the whole picture together. And like you said, at the point at which the historical point of fact that's being used in a narrative is incorrect, that those are addressed right straightforwardly, but not at the expense of the truth and experience that a community or an individual has had. Doron, your experiences, your life, your heritage, it is an exciting story, and we're so happy you could share it with us. I will share your telephone number and email in our show notes. Folks can reach out to you. I think you're a great resource for high school and university teachers, groups in churches that might be doing some sort of study, Judaic studies, Jewish history, Holocaust studies. I really think it's important that people know that you're here and that you're available, and your expertise is truly valued. So we want to be able to distribute that as much as possible. Thank you so much, Doron.
Thank you very much for your time, and God bless all the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Shavua Tov.
Shavua tov.
If you enjoy these conversations, please visit us at www.thejerusalemconnection.us. Find all our podcasts on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast program. Follow us on social media, subscribe, like, and share our content to reach the broadest audience.